The closing bell has rung, but the business story continues. I'm Robert Tan, you're watching Business Brief. Let's get started. The government bans the deployment of newly hired Filipino workers to several Middle Eastern countries due to the conflict in the region. The United Kingdom grants the U.S. access to its bases for defensive strikes against Iran. And the Justice Department will conduct a preliminary investigation on the insider trading complaint filed by the Securities and Exchange Commission against ultra-Bilyonaryo Manny Villar. U.S. President Donald Trump warns there could be more American casualties in military strikes in Iran. Trump said combat operations in Iran will continue until all of Washington's objectives are achieved. He reported that 3 U.S. service members have been killed. He vowed to avenge the death of Americans.
Combat operations continue at this time in full force, and they will continue until all of our objectives are achieved. We have very strong objectives. They could have done something 2 weeks ago, but they just couldn't get there. Earlier today, CENTCOM shared the news that 3 U.S. military service members have been killed in action. As one nation, we grieve for the true American patriots who have made the ultimate sacrifice for our nation, even as we continue the righteous mission for which they gave their lives. We pray for the full recovery of the wounded and send our immense love and eternal gratitude to the families of the fallen. And sadly, there will likely be more.
U.S. Central Command releases a video showing ongoing strikes in Iran. The video shows a stationary aircraft on the ground, including fighter jets and drones being hit during an airstrike. The U.S. said it is taking bold action to eliminate imminent threats posed by the Iranian regime. U.S. officials have said the military operations could take days. The United Kingdom grants the United States permission to use British bases for limited defensive strikes against Iran, responding to the country's ongoing retaliatory attacks. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer says the move is grounded in the UK's commitment to protect the lives of British citizens and support its regional allies.
The basis of our decision is the collective self-defence of long-standing friends and allies and protecting British lives. That is in accordance with international law, and we are publishing a summary of our legal advice. We are not joining these strikes, but we will continue with our defensive actions in the region. And we will also bring experts from Ukraine together with our own experts to help Gulf partners shoot down Iranian drones attacking them.
Starmer clarifies that the UK did not participate in the initial strikes that killed Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, and does not intend to join further offensive actions. The United Nations Human Rights Chief condemns the U.S. and Israel airstrikes across Iran. UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, calls on all sides to return to the negotiating table. In a video message, Turk warns military action will only lead to more civilian deaths and destruction.
To avert these terrible consequences for civilians, I call for restraint and implore all parties to see reason to de-escalate and for a return to the negotiating table where they have been actively seeking a solution only hours earlier. This is the only way, durably, to resolve the deep differences between states that exist.
Iran state media confirms Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was killed in Saturday's strikes. The Iranian Red Crescent Society reports attacks across 24 provinces, with at least 201 dead and 747 injured so far. Turk warns failure to de-escalate could spark a much wider conflict across the region.
I remind all parties that international law with respect to armed conflict is very clear. The protection of civilians is paramount. Each and every actor involved needs to ensure compliance with these laws, and violations of them must lead to accountability for those responsible.
Global oil prices climb as Middle East tensions escalate. In early Asian trade, Brent crude had spiked to just over $80 a barrel from Friday's close of $72.87 before slightly dropping to below $79. Brent, the international benchmark, had already risen last week ahead of the strikes that began on Saturday and killed Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. U.S. President Donald Trump had urged Iranians to rise against their government and warned the conflict could last 4 weeks. Iran had not formally closed the Strait of Hormuz, where about 20% of global oil passes through. But its Revolutionary Guards had warned vessels to avoid transiting the waterway. As global oil risk builds, the city of Manila is moving to protect its budget. The local government is ordering a 50% cut in fuel consumption effective immediately. Under Executive Order Number 7, all city departments, bureaus, and offices must reduce fuel use across vehicles, generators, heavy equipment, and other fuel-dependent assets, whether owned or leased. Officers are directed to streamline routes, consolidate trips, and minimize mileage. Electricity conservation measures are also mandatory, with exceptions for LGU-run hospitals and healthcare facilities. The order remains in effect until City Hall determines fuel conditions have stabilized. Dozens of overseas Filipino workers have returned home after their flights from Hong Kong to the Middle East were canceled. According to the Overseas Workers Welfare Administration, 31 stranded OFWs have safely arrived at NAIA Terminal 3 after they were offered international airfare tickets. But the Department of Migrant Workers said a total of 57 Abu Dhabi-bound OFWs safely returned to Manila from Hong Kong on Monday. But OWA and the DMW extended immediate assistance to the individuals stuck at the Hong Kong International Airport headed to the Middle East amid the rising tensions. The family of the Filipino caregiver killed in Israel appeals to the government for the immediate repatriation of her remains. This was revealed by Basista Pangasinan Mayor Jolly Resula Jr. He added that the family of Mary Ann De Vera also asked for privacy as they mourn her passing. De Vera had been working as a caregiver in Israel since 2019.
Ang request ng family ay kung pwede mapabilis and kung pwede daw na asikaso agad, no? Alam naman nila yung sitwasyon, so ang hiling lang nila ay sana mapabilis yung proseso ng pagpapilin. Kasama yung asawa, isang kapatid. Yung pagpunta ng OWA at DMW sa kanilang pamilya kagabi ay para makapagbigay ng mga impormasyon, para makapagbigay sila ng tulong.
Pope Leo XIV calls for an end to what he describes as a spiral of violence in the Middle East. Speaking at St. Peter's Square on Sunday, the head of the Roman Catholic Church said he is watching the escalating conflict with deep concern. He stresses that lasting stability cannot be built on the threat of weapons, but only through reasonable, genuine, and responsible dialogue.
I am following with deep concern what is happening in the Middle East and Iran at this dramatic time. Stability and peace cannot be built through mutual threats or with weapons that sow destruction, pain and death. They can only be achieved through reasonable, genuine and responsible dialogue. Faced with the possibility of a tragedy of enormous proportions, I address a heartfelt appeal to the parties involved to assume moral responsibility to stop the spiral of violence before it becomes an irreparable abyss.
Dinanzi alla possibilità di una tragedia di proporzioni.
The 270 million peso Cannon Road rock shed rehabilitation in Baguio City is expected to be completed this year. That's according to Public Works Secretary Vince Dizon. Dizon says repairs and completion of the rock shed and tunnel damaged by tropical cyclones will start in the first week of March. Dizon emphasizes that a strong foundation is key to keep the road and rock shed durable.
Habang hindi nagagawa itong rock shed na to, paulit-ulit nang masisira itong kalye na to. Paulit-ulit lang yan. Kasi every rainy season, sigurado yan, may babagsak at may babagsak.
Dizon adds that Japanese consultants will help address slope protection across Benguet and the Cordillera region to reduce landslides and soil erosion. Senate President Vicente Soto III files a bill seeking a sweeping reorganization of the Department of Public Works and Highways as the agency faces intensified scrutiny over corruption allegations. Senate Bill 1835, or the Infrastructure Governance Act, aims to strengthen oversight, streamline operations, and close structural gaps that may enable corruption. The measure calls for a structural overhaul of the department, including a reorganization of the department proper and a clear rationalization of power across central, regional, and district offices. On the transparency and accountability front, the bill proposes creating an infrastructure maintenance services unit to inspect and evaluate completed projects. It also establishes an infrastructure inspectorate team that will conduct mandatory inspections before any project payment is released. The Philippines is close to achieving its long-targeted upper middle income status this year. Executive Secretary Ralph Rector explained this comes as the country reported a gross national income per capita of $44.70 in 2024, just $26 short of the $44.96 UMIC threshold. Citing World Bank projections, he noted that the country's GNI per capita is expected to reach $61.19 by 2029. The Department of Justice has issued a subpoena against ultra-Bilyonaryo Manny Villar and his family to answer a criminal investigation into alleged market manipulation and insider trading involving a trillion peso accounting gap. DOJ spokesperson Paulo Martinez says the criminal complaint filed by the Securities and Exchange Commission against Villar Holdings Corporation will proceed to the preliminary investigation stage. He confirms that subpoenas were served upon respondents including Manny Villar, former Senator Cynthia Villar, their children Senators Mark and Camille, and Director Manuel Paulo. The SEC filed a complaint in January citing false and misleading disclosures over audit statements. The investigators alleged that the inflated profits were engineered to create artificial demand for Villar land stock, peaking at 2,498 pesos per share. Shares later plunged to 608 pesos after the regulator flagged the inconsistencies. Manny Villar has since dismissed the allegations. The Philippine government imposes a deployment ban on first-time overseas Filipino workers to countries experiencing escalating tensions in the Middle East. Department of Migrant Workers Secretary Hans Leo Kakdak says Alert Level 2 automatically triggers the deployment ban for newly hired or first-time workers. The Department of Foreign Affairs clarifies 6 countries, including the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Israel are at Alert Level 2, while Lebanon is at Alert Level 3. While there is no mass repatriation at this time, the government continues to safeguard Filipino workers across the region.
Walang mass repatriation sa ngayon kasi yun po ay yung mandatory level, which is alert level 4. But for the countries in the Gulf and Israel, hindi pa po tayo humantong sa level ng repatriation, but mass repatriation, but may mga humihiling na rin. Halimbawa sa Dubai, 80 ang humiling na kung maaari. It's a live count of course, but kung maaari ay sila yung makauwi na. Yet we are already also preparing, bagamat sarado ang airspace sa Dubai at ang airports, alam naman natin na inatake sa Dubai. Kaya meron din tayong paghahanda in terms of giving the 80 who need repatriation assistance, temporary basic needs assistance, and shelters are also available as I mentioned.
Expert warns that rising global oil prices are likely to trigger a domino effect across the Philippine economy. On BNC's Business 360, GCash head of Wealth Management, Market Education and Advisory, John Garcia, says escalating tensions in the Middle East are driving up global oil prices, which will push inflation higher in the Philippines.
Well, we're a net importer of oil. 90% I think is imported, and higher oil prices will have a domino effect across all the goods and services that we consume in the Philippines. And it would really depend on how deep this inflationary impacts would go. I mean, right now, the BSP is still within the inflation targets, but those things might change because of the recent developments that happened over the weekend.
With inflation risks rising, policymakers' actions are crucial to cushion the economy and limit the impact on consumers and businesses.
At $100 per barrel, what do you think that's going to be doing to inflation here at home?
Well, definitely, prices of goods and services will rise. Now, the thing is, what would the policymakers be doing to control that? So, coming from an easing standpoint, right? We're not so sure what the directions would be next. But definitely, what our policymakers would be doing is within their control. How can they temper inflation?
Former President Rodrigo Duterte's case at the International Criminal Court is likely headed for trial. That's according to the counsel of the group Duterte Panagutin Campaign Network. On Bilyonaryo News channels At the Forefront, Attorney Jojo Lacanilao commends the prosecution's methodical and clinical presentation of the merits of Duterte's crimes against humanity case. Lacanilao notes that while Duterte's defense team led by Nicholas Kaufman raised some valid arguments, their overall case lacks strength and impact.
You mentioned na ang ICC parang pitbull. Parang pitbull siya, di ba? Yan yung description mo kanina before we started this interview.
Hindi bumibitaw ang ICC. So, the least I can say, just to be at least very objective on this, the issues are joined. And so there's no reason why this should not go to trial.
Meanwhile, Lacanilao says his group will still file a case against the 8 named coke perpetrators in FPRRD's war on drugs if the ICC decides not to pursue charges against them. Among those who have been named include Senators Bongo and Bato de la Rosa, former PNP Chief Oscar Albayalde, and former Justice Secretary Vitaliano Aguirre.
And the most important for them is that the main perpetrator is actually in jail right now, which is President Duterte. And who knows, they may be satisfied to just indict him and convict him and let the others sort of be there as part of the common plan, because it's important to point out that it was not just President Duterte who actually implemented this. There were other people who actually helped him. And that will show you the common plan, which is an important element in crimes against humanity.
We'll take a short break. This is Business Brief. Welcome back to Business Brief. For more on the tension in the Middle East, we'll be speaking with Ron Acoba. Ron Acoba is the MFDA CDA co-founder and chief investment strategist at Trading Edge. Now, Ron, in the last 48 hours, we've seen coordinated strikes inside Iran and swift retaliation across the region. Now, from a market perspective, how serious is this escalation and how is it affecting the Philippines today?
Well, it's definitely serious enough for investors to look into their portfolio and reassess. If you recall, the local market is actually in the midst of a 9.22% year-to-date rally prior to today. So obviously, with all of this happening quite recently, it's enough reason for investors to book some of those profits in the meantime and see whether this is going to be a theme or whether this is going to be an opportunity. In the meantime, though, I think how the markets are moving, people are reassessing and taking profits for the meantime. Globally also, the global market is in the midst of a bull market. A lot of bourses are actually trading at fresh highs, right? So there's a reason for investors to stay on the sidelines while this is happening.
Now, you've mentioned markets don't usually just react to headlines. They do reassess risk. Now, what are you seeing across equities, oil, gold, and other safe haven assets?
Well, immediately as the new week opened, all the bourses in our region, except for China, were started in the red. As of a while ago, a majority of our peers ended with a 1 to 2.4% decline. The Philippines ended today with a 2.7% decline. So definitely there's a risk-off mode. Gold is actually firm with a gain of about 2% as we speak due to safe haven flows back to a high of $5,400. And obviously with flows coming out of risk assets, this is obviously going into safe haven assets like gold and cash equivalents.
Now, oil prices have jumped on renewed geopolitical tensions. Is most of that risk already priced in, or could we see a further increase on the oil prices in the next coming days?
I don't quite know the answer. As we speak, global crude prices is currently up by about 8% back to $72, $73 per barrel. Now, going back to last year, ahead of the attack of U.S. to Iran, this obviously happened as late as last year, June, if I remember correctly. Back then, crude prices were doing at around 65, and upon the attack of the U.S. in Iran territories, crude prices surged to as high as 78. So that's about a 20% jump. So crude prices as of now is up by only 8%. So there remains to be an upside from that perspective. Also, it's also a question of how long will this military conflict remain, because the longer that this will remain, then the higher for potential for supply chain disruption would be.
Now, the Strait of Hormuz is critical to global energy inflows. Now, if disruption becomes more than just a threat, now, what does that mean for inflation and global growth?
Well, definitely inflation globally would pick up. If you recall back in 2021 at the onset of the Russia and Ukraine war, global prices surged from around 60, if I remember correctly, all the way to a high of $130. And that particular event was actually the one that started the period of global increase in inflation. And from then on, 2021, 2, 3, 4 years after. So we're still feeling the effect of the spike in inflation during that time. So that's the worst case that could happen, actually, is for crude to really spike towards that level. Hopefully not. But if it doesn't, that's definitely gonna affect global growth and consumption.
Now, with inflation still elevated and growth uneven, now, how does geopolitical shocks complicate central bank decisions?
Well, central banks can only do so much, right? And their focus is mostly on the demand side. And the main mandate of central banks is to temper prices or to try to jumpstart consumption either by decreasing interest rates or hiking interest rates. So when inflation is up by increase in demand, then what the central bank does is to hike the interest rates. But the ongoing jump in inflation that will come from an increase in crude prices is not because of consumption, it's not because of demand. So the central bank cannot really affect that much. So it's going to be more on the fiscal end. How will the government react, and what are the policies that they will implement to counter the increase in crude prices so that this would not be tempered downstream, down to the consumer's end?
Now, what do you think could be done on the policy end?
It's hard to say, but one of the options, for example, that the government can do is to perhaps put a hiatus on the excise tax on fuel taxes, on pump prices, diba? If you recall, during the Duterte admin, that's the law that they passed to increase the excise tax in fuel to compensate for the decrease in taxes for a certain level of employees. Now, the government can opt to do that, but then again, it's a balancing act.
Yes.
It's a balancing act. If you do that, then that's a big chunk of income for the government that they will forego, and the government's debt balance would be affected negatively if they choose to do that path. So it's really hard.
It's hard to strike that balance, to do. Because like with the Banco Central, like a few weeks back, they've already decreased 25 basis points on the interest rates, and you can only go so low or you can only go so high. So it's hard. Like on the point of view of economists like you, where's that balance?
Well, it's knowing what your priorities are. Is the government's priority its credit rating standing, or to really stoke up consumption? Because if it's me who's in the government, perhaps I would prioritize our consumers, our citizens first, diba? Because all of our purchasing power are being eaten up by increase of inflation, not just for this year, but for the last 4 to 5 years. So perhaps it's about time for the government to prioritize the citizens, to prioritize
especially
the
now,
consumption.
the Philippines is a very transportation-heavy country, and with another round of increases in gasoline prices, it's going to take its toll on everybody's wallets.
Sure, for sure.
Now, Ron, when investors talk about a higher risk premium, now, what does that actually mean for portfolio positioning in the near term?
Well, higher risk premium means an investor would require a higher risk for a higher premium for the risk that he will take. So this may be equivalent to a higher yield or lower prices for the investments because of that, again, exceeding risk that he will take. Now, it depends on what the risk profile of the investor is. If he's more on the risk taker side, then he would obviously love to jump in and embrace the risk that is being provided to him, because that would obviously be compensated with higher potential yield. So again, it depends on the investor if he's a risk taker or not. If he's risk averse, then it's best to stay away and go for the safe haven channels.
Now, during geopolitical stress like what we're experiencing today, now which asset classes typically hold up better and which tend to struggle?
Well, gold prices continue to firm up. In fact, since President Trump sat in his position, geopolitical concerns has been the theme of his presidency. So since that time, gold prices have continued to firm up, and as we speak, gold is now trading at around $5,400 per ounce. So gold is a pretty good recipient of safe haven flows during geopolitical tensions.
Now, Philippine regional lens for the Philippines. Now, what is the most immediate economic exposure right now? Oil prices? Is it remittances? Are OFWs affected? The peso? Or overall market sentiment?
All of what you mentioned, in fact, in terms of oil prices, because if I'm not mistaken, close to 100% of our oil consumption is actually imported,
Yes.
right? And a lot of it, in fact, majority of it is coming from coming and supplied by the Middle East, right? So obviously, if crude prices go up, this will definitely spill over to inflation. And as I've mentioned, for the last 4 to 5 years, inflation has been the main problem for consumers. That's why our ability to consume, our ability to purchase have been dampened so much since pre-pandemic times, right? So second thing is remittances. Remittances coming from the Middle East account for about 17% of the total cash remittances for our country. So that's a big dent if a part of it gets tempered. And not only that, because these remittances are instantaneously used by the recipients to consume, diba? So it has a domino effect, much like what the earlier person said. So if you temper remittances, consumption by those who receive them would also be tempered. And in connection with the peso, the value of the peso related to the dollar, remittances is actually one of the which that is keeping our peso valuation at float. Because without that, then perhaps we could see our exchange rate run away above 60 already.
So what can we expect in let's say the next coming days, next couple of weeks, if oil prices remain elevated? Now, how quickly could that filter into inflation, transport costs, and household spending?
And, in terms of sentiment in the capital market, it's instantaneous. We will immediately see that. Feel it. In terms of the end user, the consumers, it's not going to take a lot of time because as you case in point, you mentioned that the oil price hike would start immediately tomorrow, Tuesday. There's unscheduled oil price hike coming tomorrow. And this does not even take into consideration the recent 8% chop. Hindi pa kasama yun, di ba? So immediately, that alone, consumers would already feel the impact of the increase in prices as early as next week, the next round of price increases.
Now, let's look at the local markets. Now, what is your outlook right now on RCR, Jollibee, or Meralco shares?
Well, one of the best investment vehicles to be on, given a period of uncertainty, a period of volatility, much like what we're having as of late, is going into high dividend, safe haven investments, much like what the names that you've mentioned, defensive names such as Meralco, such as Manila Water,
blue chip stocks,
utilities that demand for their services remain the same no matter what the economic environment is. And REITs, much like RCR, much like A-REIT, they will continue to pay a good enough yield of around 5 to 6%. So yes, those are good options to be in during times of market volatility.
So it's not affected that much. In actuality, they usually go.
Everything is affected because a part of investments is still driven by sentiment flows. But at least you're protected by dividends that will come in the event that their nominal prices become weak in the near term.
Now, do you think the dividend of RCR will increase?
Well, based on its company statements or company projections alone, they're actually on track to continually expand their portfolio, and they will continue to infuse this new buildings, new malls into RCR. So that alone would definitely be positive.
So would you advise, let's say, a new investor right now to look into these stocks, and if they're looking into investing today?
Given what we're having right now, given the environment that what we're having right now, yes, I would definitely point new investors to look into defensive names such as we've mentioned, Meralco, Manila Water, and higher yielding names such as RCR and A-REIT.
Yes. Now, in a prolonged risk-off environment, Ron, now, how vulnerable is the peso?
Well, vulnerable enough to the point that one of the reasons why the peso actually strengthened, at least as of last week, diba? It went to as low as 57.5 sometime last week from a high of 59.5, threatening to reach 60 a few weeks back because of foreign flows of foreigners going away from developed markets and going into emerging markets. And that is why actually local markets have rallied in the past 8 to 10 weeks. Now, if these foreign funds decide to leave the Philippines again, then obviously they will have to sell their Philippine assets and the peso may go back to around 59.5 again. And another reason that could dampen the near-term outlook for the peso is that the rate gap between the BSP and the Fed is just 50 bips. Speaking of a risk premium, that a 50 bip risk premium is actually not enough for foreigners to consider putting their money here, because they're essentially taking more risk for investments in an emerging market that is not actually growing too fast. Take note, going back to the third and fourth quarter slowdown in growth, and they're only being paid by an extra 5.5%. So that doesn't really make sense, right? So if they come into senses and given their senses and given all that what's happening, that could actually trigger a reversal of flows again.
Now, looking at another market, Ron, if these tensions still continue, do you think logistics companies will be greatly affected? And having said that, do you think investors should avoid stocks like ICTSI?
Well, ICT as of the end of the session a while ago was down 5% precisely because of concerns that the global trade may slow down. Their volume in terms of TEUs may slow down because of the increase in crude prices affecting transportation costs. Right. So yes, that is a concern. But if you look back to June or July of last year, when more or less the same thing also happened, the U.S. attacking Iran, and if you look back to 2021 at the onset of the Ukraine and Russia war, more or less the same thing happened. Crude prices spiked from around $65 to $138, as I have mentioned. ICT managed to do pretty well, right? They managed to weather the storm despite the concerns that global trade may weaken. Even if you go back last year with Trump's imposition of global tariffs, right? So there were concerns that global trade would really slow down, but this so far didn't really pan out, and that's why you see ICT trading at new highs. So in my opinion, and based on how ICT performed,
it still looks good.
Performed during distress, that's actually an opportunity to pick up their shares because they always manage to do better given the uncertain environment.
Now, finally, Ron, what practical steps should businesses take or individuals, to strengthen resilience?
Well, one of the important steps for them to take is to be aware of what's happening and how would this uncertainty impact their business, and to be liquid because being liquid will allow you to weather the storm, diba? And additionally, being liquid will also allow you to be tactical. Tactical meaning, if there's an opportunity, whether in terms of business or an investment vehicle, if you're liquid enough to identify it while prices are weak, while business is slow, then you may be in the best position to take advantage of that.
Look at the opportunities out there. On that note, Ron, thank you very much for joining us today and your insights, and hopefully, tensions will ease in the next coming days. Okay, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. This is Business Brief. Asian shares are mostly lower as the United States and Israel attack Iran. Kospi has closed today while Nikkei 225, Hang Seng, and Straits Times are in the red and the rest are in the green. In currency trading, the US dollar mostly appreciates against the Asian currencies. In commodities, gold and oil trades higher. In crypto, Bitcoin rises almost 0.6%, and Ethereum is flat with a downward bias. Qantas shares slumped more than 10% to a 10-month low after U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran and surging oil prices. The stock fell as much as 10.4% to 892 Australian dollars. Virgin Australia dropped to 303 Australian dollars, its lowest in nearly a month, while Air New Zealand fell to 55 cents, its lowest since April 7, 2025. Global air travel remains in turmoil as airstrikes close key Middle East hubs, including Dubai and Doha, stranding thousands of passengers. Philippine shares end in the negative territory. The PSCI closes nearly 0.3% lower to 64.26. Among the sectoral indices, only mining and oil end in the green, with services falling the most at over 4%. Decliners outpace advancers 159 to 53, with value turnover at 9.1 billion pesos. Majority of the day's most active stocks end in the red, with Ayala Corporation falling the most at over 6%. And in currencies, the peso closes at 58.2 against the US dollar, down from the previous close of 57.665. The Securities and Exchange Commission approves a regulatory framework for sukuk or Islamic bonds aimed at attracting Middle Eastern capital and diversifying the domestic market. The SEC said the new rules set guidelines for the registration, structure, and disclosure of Sharia-compliant instruments, allowing various models, including hybrid structures. Issuers must appoint independent Sharia advisors to certify compliance, and public offerings require transparency on purpose, transaction flows, and obligations. All publicly offered sukuk must be backed by a trust deed and obtain a credit rating, while listing and trading will follow exchange rules. Aboitiz Equity Ventures is set for a board overhaul, with longtime directors stepping aside and new members joining for the 2026 to 2027 term. Pierluigi Sigismondi and Eric Ramon Recto are newly nominated to the board, while Mikel Aboitiz and Joan de Asis will step down after years of service. Sigismondi will bring extensive global experience from Nestle, Unilever, and other multinational companies. Recto, on the other hand, is vice chairman of Aboitiz Power and connected to prominent business circles. The move has signaled a refresh at the top of one of the country's largest diversified groups, with interest in power, banking, food, infrastructure, and digital ventures. DigiPlus Interactive Corporation Chairman and Bilyonaryo Eusebio Tanco invests over 1 billion pesos in the company. DigiPlus disclosed that Tanco bought 63.119 million common shares on February 27 at 16 pesos 40 centavos each, totaling about 1.04 billion pesos. His total holdings rose to 723.047 million shares, with a market value of 11.86 billion pesos. DigiPlus said Tanco's purchase underscores his conviction in the company's expansion strategy. Abacor Capital drops 4.2 billion peso joint venture for Monte Maria tourism project in Batangas and shifts to a lease-to-buy setup. Under the new arrangement, Monte Maria and High Source will lease 20 hectares at 540 pesos per square meter per year, and with an option to buy Phase 1 land at 9,000 pesos per square meter within 5 years. The lease term is 25 years, extendable twice, and future phases will be priced at fair market value based on development milestones. Abacor said the deal provides anchor tenants recurring cash flow and boosts the value of surrounding properties as the project moves forward. The net income of the Union Bank of the Philippines drops by 16.7% to 10 billion pesos in 2025, despite a strong second-half recovery. Net income in the final 6 months more than doubled from the first half, fueled by momentum from the acquired city consumer business. Total revenues rose to 83.2 billion pesos as customer numbers climbed to 18.6 million pesos, with consumer loans now making up 61% of the loan book. The bank attributed growth to digital initiatives, including higher transaction volumes and fees, reflecting its shift toward retail and digital banking. PXP Energy Corporation loses more than double as output from the mature Galloc field declines and global crude prices soften. The company posted a core net loss of 50.2 million pesos, up from 33.3 million pesos, while consolidated net loss more than doubled to 77.5 million pesos, pressured by financing costs and foreign exchange volatility. Petroleum revenues fell 16.9% to 49.8 million pesos. Despite the losses, PXP moves to diversify with 3 new petroleum service contracts to continue existing production. In central Japan, about 10,000 men in loincloths clash in a chaotic ritual, all for a chance to touch the lucky man and ward off bad fortune. The Economia Naked Festival dates back to more than 1,000 years. It's a purification ritual to protect communities from misfortune in the Aichi Prefecture. The highlight, the arrival of the Shin Otoko, or designated lucky man, who is engulfed by the crowd as participants scramble to touch him, hoping to chase away their own bad luck. Participants also carry elaborately decorated bamboo poles into the shrine. Despite the oldest purification rituals, keeping the chaotic tradition alive. And that's a wrap for today's Business Brief. I'm Robert Tan. Join us again tomorrow for the stories that help you plan your next big, bold business move. Only here on BNC, the Bilyonaryo News Channel.
In a fast